What's going on YouTube, and welcome back. Today we are looking at an entire land. I think this area just needs to be talked about all in one video instead of trying to do all of them as separate attractions. We're going to look at Storybook Circus in the Magic Kingdom. It's a sub-land in Fantasyland. And today we're going to take a look at the history of Storybook Circus, its origins, why it's here, how it got here, and what was here before, and what's currently here today. So for starters, we're going to take a look back at the history of this area and what it used to be. So for starters, before Storybook Circus in 1988, this was an expansion on the Magic Kingdom, and it was basically called Mickey's Birthday Land, and it was to celebrate Mickey Mouse's 60th birthday. And this was one of the first expansion areas in the Magic Kingdom once Michael Eisner and Frank Wells were the CEO of Disney. And a couple years after that, in 1990, the land was renamed to Mickey's Starland, and this was rethemed after the birthday. So it was basically the same details, but pretty much just changed the name for a very brief amount of time. And then 5 years after that, for a very short amount of time, they rechanged the name to Mickey's Toyland. Not exactly sure why they changed it to Toyland, but it was that for 1995. And in 1996, the name that would be held up until its eventual closure, it was called Mickey's Toontown Fair. So from 1996 up until 2011, this was Mickey's Toontown Fair. And it was a small cartoon-style land featuring Mickey and Minnie's houses, a petting zoo, and kid-friendly attractions. They had recreated Duckburg. They had Donald Duck's cruise ship as like a splash play area. They had a couple of interesting things in this area. But you have to remember, back in '88 when this was all built, this was a temporary expansion just to create more capacity in Magic Kingdom. So this was never the long-term goal for this area, and that's where eventually we saw the giant Fantasyland expansion, which this was a part of. And Disney decided to close Mickey's Toontown Fair in 2011, February 11th, to make room for the eventual Fantasyland area. So the opening of Storybook Circus, March 12th of 2012, was the first phase of the soft opening. And what's kind of interesting is the area was kind of opened in phases, right? So in March 12th of 2012, we saw the first phase. July, we saw the Dumbo area and the splash zone added. And then October, we saw the full completion of the area with the shops and the character areas added. The area was designed to feel like a traveling circus that had just arrived by train, and Disney Imagineers even created little details. I mean, there's elephant footprints in the pavement, there's little peanut shells stamped in the ground, vintage circus posters all over, colorful big top tents, and even a railroad prop with banners. All that type of stuff is in this area. And one of the biggest changes was moving Dumbo from the center of Fantasyland into Storybook Circus, and Disney doubled the ride output by adding not only one Dumbo spinner, but two. And that's where we have two of the spinner attractions in here. The attraction was introduced as one of Disney's first major interactive indoor queues. So before you go on the attraction, there's an entire queue area where you can go basically inside of this tent. But it is, I do not believe, they didn't actually make it in the Minecraft version, but basically you get to play in this whole play area, and once it's time to ride, then you can ride, which I think is a really good way of creating that line, especially for little kids. I mean, a lot of people, this is their first attraction in Walt Disney, like in the Disney parks, is riding Dumbo. So I think it's a great way to kind of get people into it, right? Like, you're not sitting on a queue for your first ride. It actually makes sense. Another part of this area is the Barnstormer, and this was originally called the Barnstormer at Goofy's Wiseacre Farm. And the coaster was rethemed into the Great Goofini, starring Goofy as a Daredevil circus stunt pilot. And it remains one of Disney World's first roller coasters for young kids. Then that takes you toward the back toward Pete's Silly Sideshow. Now, what's interesting with this area, it's another circus-style character meet and greet. And it has characters such as Goofy as the Great Goofini, right? Kind of fitting with the Barnstormer. Daisy as a fortune teller, Donald as a snake charmer, and Minnie as a magician. And then over here, you have either you love it or you hate it. It is the Casey Jr. Splash and Play area. And it's basically a small water play area for kids to cool off in during the summer. They have like giraffes sticking out of here, elephants, and they've got a couple little splash areas for kids to interact with. And the circus organ music in the area around Pete's Silly Sideshow was recorded using antique circus crank organs from real collectors, which is kind of interesting. And from 2012 to 2014, this area actually had Streetmosphere, and it was the Giggle Gang Streetmosphere. So they were live circus performers, and they included clowns, musicians, and comedy acts that inspired that old traveling circus appeal. And some of the performers were graduates of Ring-a-Ling Brothers Clown College, which is kind of interesting, right? So the reactions from fans over the years, it was always seen as a divisive area, and some guests missed the nostalgic charm of what Mickey's Toontown Fair was, right? It made sense, right? You're at Mickey's house, you're at Mickey's Magic Kingdom, right? So where does Mickey live? His house and Minnie's house is right here, right? So it made sense in that sense. Others appreciate the calmer family zone area. It's got a lot of beginner rides, a lot of shading, the splash areas, right? This is a perfect kids area. And Storybook Circus, it really is an important area because, it was a major turning point for Fantasyland. It was modernized for aging children's attractions like Dumbo. It improved the ride capacity for Dumbo, which was an issue, and it introduced interactive cues, which I think this is the perfect area to add that to. They connected Disney storytelling with vintage circus Americana, and I think in Magic Kingdom, I think they did a great job of that. And I think what's really interesting too, this kind of goes back to the turning point of Fantasyland bringing in Storybook Circus. Originally, this was going to be a Pixie Hollow area, and the original concept art for the new Fantasyland coming in 2016, they had Pixie Hollow, and it was a meet and greet with Tinkerbell and things like that. They ended up changing it because, you have the whole Princess Fairy Tale Hall, you have the Enchanted Tales with Belle, you have all these, I guess you could argue, more of a young girl audience appeal. So what was there for the little boys to do, right? Like, yeah, they'll go see the princess with their sister, but maybe that's not really what they're there for. Well, this is that perfect area that does that. And it kind of makes you wonder, what would that Pixie Hollow area have looked like? I'm kind of curious, because we haven't seen any sort of Pixie Hollow themed land come to any of the Disney parks since then. So that concept kind of just was around, and then it went away and never really came back. So I'm always kind of curious as to what that actually would have entailed and what that potentially could have looked like. But I'd love to know what you guys think down below. What do you guys think of Storybook Circus? And like I said, there's a lot to do here. You have Pete's Silly Sideshow. You have the Big Top Souvenirs, one of the biggest merchandise areas in the Magic Kingdom is right here. You have 2 Dumbo the Flying Elephant attractions. You have, the Barnstormer. It all works. And then you've got the train, which connects in here as well. So there's a lot of history to this area, a lot going on. And I think if you really look it out, there's a lot of really good hiding spots, right? Like there's, if you're maybe a young mother, maybe, nursing. I've heard of a lot of people that nurse their children back here because it's just so quiet. There's so much area kind of just to explore, and I think that's kind of lacking in today's Disney. Everything needs to have a purpose or has a shop or a store or a restaurant, but I think this is one of the more modern, but honestly one of the last lands that just gives you a place to explore and just look around and see the different areas and kind of just relax. So I think that's going to do it for today's video, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this area as much as I did, because I do think this is a nice area. It fits Fantasyland, it fits the Magic Kingdom, and kind of makes you wonder beforehand, why was this not here before, honestly? That's going to do it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys again next time.